Hey podcaster, I'm Tim Wahlberg, your podcast performance coach, with another actionable tip so you can sound like a pro and gain more podcast fans. Today's tip is unfortunately going to be really short because I'm up against the clock and we've run out of time, so we're going to have to end it there. I wish we had more time. As a listener, how does that make you feel? This is one of my biggest radio and podcast pet peeves. I was reminded of this while working with a colleague recently who mentioned time on the air. Here's what happened. This is on the CBC in Canada. He had a guest on the show who came in to talk about how suicide had taken both of his sons. I don't have to tell you how powerful and heavy a story like this can be. We usually talk to a guest for 5 to 7 minutes, and at about the 5-minute mark, the guest mentioned something as a sidebar, saying, "Oh, that's a long story and you probably don't have the time for that." And the host paused. He looked at me on the other side of the glass, then looked at the guest and said, "Yeah, we do. Tell us." I could have ran into the studio and kissed our host on the spot. I knew, like my host, that this guest was worth blowing up the clock for. We'll figure out the rest of our programming on the fly later. What was most important at that very second was not only giving respect to our guest, but respecting our listener and not shortchanging them. We stayed with that guest for 18 minutes. It was as long as we could have before literally getting cut off by the network. As podcasters, we're so lucky. We really don't have any time restrictions except for the ones we put on ourselves. So don't let your clock rule you, and don't let time cheat your listener. Avoid saying things like, "We're up against the clock. We've run out of time. That's all the time we've got." Is it really? When you as a host mention time, or to my point here, lack thereof, you're telling me a couple of things. Number one, I'm missing out. I'm getting shortchanged as the listener, and there's more information, but I won't be able to hear it. And number two, it's your fault. I'm going to be pissed. I'm going to be mad at you because it seems to me like you can't manage your show or your guest, and somehow time has gotten away from you. Not cool. I'm going to tell you 2 ways to deal with this in a second, but first realize your listener knows roughly how long your show is. Just deliver on your promise. Don't leave anything out. And if you're not leaving anything out, don't leave them with that impression, because it shouldn't be your go-to way to say goodbye to a guest or wrap up your show. You know when you tune into Just the Tip that I'll deliver 1 tip per episode in about 5 minutes. But if you look back at my other episodes, I sometimes go 6, 7, or 9 minutes long, which is nearly doubling the length of an episode. But sometimes my shows are as short as 3.5 minutes. I'm going to take the time it takes to deliver on my promise. So, how do you deal with time when you're a podcaster? 2 ways. The easiest way, say nothing. Don't mention time ever. You don't need to. If you've reached the end of your story or interview or presentation, end it. Get out. Don't apologize and say you've run out of time. Say nothing and move on. You do that by saying, "Thanks for being on the show." Or, "It's been great speaking to you. Thanks for doing this." Or, "For even more on this topic, visit my website." Or, "On my next episode." That's it. Your listener won't feel like they're missing anything. And you sound like a pro because you've managed your show like one and executed things perfectly. However, if you really can't afford the extra 10 or 15 minutes you went over, the other way to deal with timing is by editing. Cut out something after your session before you cut off your guest during your session. Remember, your listener won't know what they're missing. They really won't, because you've edited it out. To them, it was never there. And I'm not sure why you can't afford a little extra time on an episode. I don't know what that reason would be. I would just still call it mismanagement on your part. Go ahead, I dare you to come up with an excuse that I couldn't rebut with, "That situation could have been avoided if you managed it differently." If you can think of something, email me, please. I'd love to have that conversation with you. I always talk about not wasting your listeners' time because that's disrespectful. But cheating them out of something they paid for with their valuable time is even worse. And I hope that's just the tip you need. Speaking of time, it only takes 15 minutes to get some clarity. Need help with your show format, how to handle a guest, got questions about production or editing? I'm always happy to talk with you guys. Let's chat. I love finding out what you're up to. Every time I get introduced to another podcaster, I learn something new. Get in touch, reach out, book your free 15-minute discovery call at podcastperformancecoach.com. It's right on the front page. I'm Tim Walbert. See ya!